Welcome to What If Sleepstorian, where forgotten echoes and familiar faces meet under the glow of fading lamplight. Here, stories drift like smoke through the corridors of time, soft, haunting, and full of wonder. Tonight we begin with something a little mysterious, a tale that stirs gently beneath the surface. So dim the lights, settle in, and let the quiet pull of the past guide you into tonight's slumbering journey. Picture yourself in the autumn of 1919, in the lowlands of Flanders, where the earth still bears the scars of a war that has only just faded into uneasy silence. The fields, once torn by trenches and barbed wire, now lie under a blanket of fog, their churned soil hidden beneath patches of stubborn grass and wildflowers that dare to bloom. The air is damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, with a faint, bitter trace of coal smoke from distant villages. Can you imagine the smell of the air back then? It's not the crisp, clean breath of a storybook countryside, but something heavier, tinged with the memory of gunpowder and loss. The villages here are small, their stone houses huddled together as if seeking warmth against the chill. The cobbled streets are slick with rain, reflecting the flicker of gas lamps that burn weakly against the dusk. Listen closely, and you can hear the creak of a cartwheel, the soft clop of a horse's hooves, and the low murmur of voices speaking in Flemish, their words softened by the fog. Touch the walls of these houses, and you'd feel the roughness of weathered stone, cold and damp beneath your fingers, as if the very buildings are weary. Taste the air, and there's a faint metallic tang, a reminder of the earth's wounds, mingled with the simple, earthy flavour of bread baked in wood-fired ovens, shared sparingly among families who know hunger too well. This is not the Flanders of romantic tales where knights ride through sunlit meadows. This is a land where survival is a quiet, daily battle. The war has ended, but its shadow lingers in the faces of the villagers, men who returned with haunted eyes, women who carry the weight of the loss in their stooped shoulders, children who play silently in the streets as if afraid to disturb the ghosts that linger. The people here are resilient, but their lives are hard, their hands calloused from work, their meals meagre, their nights filled with the creak of old wooden beds and the howl of wind through cracked windows. What would you have done in a world like this, where every day asks you to endure just a little longer? Into this world steps a man unlike any other in these parts. Hercule Poirot, the meticulous Belgian detective, his small frame wrapped in a neatly pressed overcoat, his moustache immaculate despite the damp. His eyes, sharp and green as polished jade, scan the village of St. Maria with a quiet intensity. He moves with a deliberate grace, his polished shoes clicking softly on the cobbles, each step measured, as if the very act of walking is an exercise in order. Poirot has come here not by choice, but by necessity, drawn by a letter, a single, cryptic note, its ink smudged, its words urgent. A mystery festers in this village, it said, one that speaks of a headless figure seen in the fog, a spectre that rides under moonlight, leaving fear in its wake. The villagers call it the headless horseman, a name whispered behind closed doors, as if speaking it too loudly might summon the thing itself. They say it appears on the old road that cuts through the fields, where the willows bend low and the mist pools like a living thing. They say it carries no head, its cloak black as pitch, its horse's hooves silent until they're upon you. But Poirot, with his love of symmetry and reason, does not believe in ghosts. He believes in facts, in motives, in the hidden truths that lie beneath the surface of fear. Yet even he, as he stands in the village square, feels the weight of the fog, the way it clings to his skin like a second coat, the way it muffles sound and blurs the edges of the world. The square is quiet tonight, save for the soft drip of water from a stone fountain, its basin cracked and mossy. A woman hurries past, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes darting to the shadows. A dog barks in the distance, its voice swallowed by the mist. Poirot adjusts his hat, his gloved fingers brushing the brim, and he thinks of the letter again. It was signed only with initials, JV, and spoke of a death, a disappearance, and a fear that has gripped St. Maria like a fever. The writer begged for his help, claiming no one else could unravel the truth, and so here he is, far from the elegance of London or the warmth of Paris, in a place where the air tastes of sorrow and the nights are too long. He begins to walk, his cane tapping lightly on the cobbles toward the inn where he will stay. The inn is a squat, timbered building, its windows glowing faintly with the light of oil lamps. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of stale beer and burning wood, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The innkeeper, a broad man with a face like weathered leather, eyes Poirot warily, but offers a room without question. The bed is narrow, the mattress thin, but Poirot does not complain. He sets his small suitcase down, its contents arranged with the precision of a military campaign, and he sits at the window, gazing out into the fog. Somewhere out there, in the fields beyond the village, a mystery waits. A mystery that wears the guise of a ghost, but is, Poirot is certain, all too human. As he sits, the detective's mind begins to work, turning over the pieces of this puzzle. The letter mentioned a young man, Peter, who vanished after a night on the old road. His body was never found, but his horse returned, its saddle stained with blood. The villagers, quick to fear, spoke of the headless horseman, a tale older than the war, older than the village itself. But Poirot knows that fear distorts truth, that stories grow like weeds in the cracks of uncertainty. He will begin tomorrow, speaking to the villagers, seeking the one who wrote the letter, piecing together the fragments of this strange, sad tale. Can you picture him there, this small man with his impeccable moustache, sitting in a dim room, his mind alight with questions? How different would your life feel in those narrow streets and flickering lamplight, where every shadow might hide a secret? The fog presses against the window, and Poirot leans back, his eyes half closed, listening to the soft hum of the world outside. The night is young, and the story is only beginning. The next morning the fog has not lifted, but thinned just enough to reveal the outlines of the village. The air is cold, sharp with the bite of autumn, and Poirot wraps his scarf tightly as he steps into the street. The villagers move slowly, their faces pale in the grey light, their hands busy with the work of survival, hauling water, chopping wood, mending clothes worn thin by time. He notices the way they avoid his gaze, their eyes flickering to the ground or the horizon, as if afraid to meet his scrutiny. They know why he is here, and they fear what he might uncover. His first stop is the church, a stone building at the edge of the square, its spire half lost in the mist. The door creaks as he enters, and the air inside is heavy with the scent of wax and old wood. A priest, thin and stooped, looks up from the altar, his hands trembling slightly as he sets down a candle. Poirot introduces himself, his voice soft but clear, and asks about Peter, about the horseman, about the fear that clings to this place like damp. The priest hesitates, his fingers twisting together, and speaks of a village haunted not just by stories but by guilt. "We are a people who have seen too much," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. "The war took our sons, our brothers, and now this shadow." Poirot listens, his head tilted slightly, his eyes never leaving the priest's face. He asks questions, gentle, precise, like a surgeon's knife, and learns of Peter's life. A young farmer, kind but headstrong, who loved a girl named Elise, who worked the fields with his father, who was last seen riding toward the old road on a moonless night. The priest speaks of whispers, of a figure seen in the fog, of hoofbeats that echo without source. But Poirot hears something else in the priest's voice, not just fear, but a thread of something hidden, something unsaid. As he leaves the church, the fog swirls around him, and he feels the weight of eyes watching from windows, from doorways. The village is alive with secrets, and Poirot knows that secrets, like roots, grow deep in places like this. He walks toward the fields, where the old road begins, its path winding through willows and marshy ground. The air here is colder, the silence deeper, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a crow. He kneels, his gloved hand brushing the earth, and finds a single small object half buried in the mud. A button, tarnished but finely made, its edges carved with a delicate pattern. It is not the kind of thing a farmer would wear. It is a clue, a tiny crack in the mystery, and Poirot tucks it into his pocket, his mind already turning. The day stretches on, and Poirot moves through the village like a ghost himself, speaking to those who will talk, listening to those who will not. He meets Elise, Peter's love, a girl with eyes red from crying and hands rough from work. She speaks of Peter's dreams, his plans to leave the village, his fear of something he would not name. She speaks of the night he vanished, of how he kissed her cheek and promised to return. Her voice breaks, and Poirot offers a handkerchief, his manner gentle but his eyes sharp. He asks about the button, and her face changes just for a moment before she shakes her head. "I don't know," she says, but Poirot knows she's lying. As the sun sets, the fog returns, thicker now, wrapping the village in a shroud. Poirot stands at the edge of the old road, his coat buttoned against the cold, his cane planted in the earth. The willows sway, their branches whispering in the wind, and for a moment he imagines he hears hoofbeats, faint and far away. He does not believe in the headless horseman, but he believes in fear, in greed, in the things that drive men to darkness. And he knows that somewhere in this village someone holds the truth. The night is falling and the story is far from over. Settle back, dear listener, and let the fog carry you deeper into this tale. What secrets lie hidden in the fields of Flanders? Close your eyes and let us drift together into the heart of the mystery. The fog of St. Maria thickens as night settles over the Flanders lowlands, wrapping the village in a cocoon of silence. Hercule Poirot stands at the edge of the old road, his breath visible in the chill air, his gloved hand resting lightly on his cane. The willows loom like sentinels, their branches drooping under the weight of mist, and the earth beneath his feet is soft, yielding slightly, as if it holds secrets too heavy to bear. The faint scent of damp moss and distant wood smoke lingers, mingling with the metallic tang of the fields, a reminder of the war's lingering wounds. Can you feel the cold seeping through your shoes, the way it clings to your skin like a whisper? This is not a place of comfort, but of endurance, where every breath carries the taste of survival. Poirot's eyes, sharp despite the dimness, trace the path of the old road as it vanishes into the fog. He thinks of the button in his pocket, its carved edges a puzzle piece that does not yet fit. The village is asleep, or so it seems, but he knows better. Fear keeps eyes open behind shuttered windows, ears straining for the sound of hoofbeats that should not come. He turns back toward the inn, his steps deliberate, the tap of his cane a quiet rhythm against the cobbles. The night is not yet done with its secrets, and neither is he. Inside the inn, the air is warm but heavy, thick with the smell of spilled ale and the faint sour note of unwashed wool. The fire in the hearth crackles, casting shadows that dance across the walls, and the innkeeper Jan wipes a glass with a rag that has seen better days. His eyes flicker to Poirot as the detective enters, but he says nothing, only nodding toward a corner table where a man sits alone, his hands wrapped around a mug. The man is broad-shouldered, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes from years of toil. His name, Poirot learns, is Willem, a farmer whose fields border the old road. Willem's voice is low, rough as the stones of the village square as he speaks of the night Peter vanished. He was a good lad, he says, his eyes fixed on the mug as if it holds answers. Too bold, maybe. Rode out to check traps, he said. Never came back. The farmer's hands tighten, his knuckles pale, and Poirot notices the tremor in his fingers, the way his gaze darts to the window. He asks gently about the headless horseman, and Willem's face darkens. Old tales, he mutters. But these days the fog plays tricks. You see things, hear things. He pauses, then adds, almost too quietly to hear, I saw it once. black cloak, no head, moving through the mist like smoke. Poirot leans forward, his expression calm but his mind racing. He does not believe in spectres, but he believes in fear, and fear, he knows, is a mask for truth. He asks about Peter's enemies, about debts or rivalries, and Willem shakes his head, but there's a hesitation, a flicker of something unspoken. The detective presses, his voice soft as velvet, and Willem admits to a quarrel. Peter and a man named Klaas, a merchant who came to the village a year ago. His wealth a stark contrast to the villagers' poverty. Klaas wanted Peter's land, Willem says. Offered good money. Peter refused. Words were said. The fire pops, sending a spark onto the hearth, and Poirot sits back, his fingers steepled. A motive, perhaps, but not a ghost. He thanks Willem, his manner polite, and rises, his coat brushing the edge of the table. The inn is quieter now. The other patrons have gone to their beds, and Jan watches from behind the bar, his rag still in hand. Poirot feels the weight of that gaze as he climbs the narrow stairs to his room, the wood creaking softly underfoot. The air up here is colder, tinged with the musty smell of old straw mattresses, and the window rattles in its frame, a restless night. He sits at the small desk, a single candle casting a warm glow across the room, and opens his notebook. His handwriting is precise, each letter a work of art, as he records Willem's words, the button, the quarrel with Klaas. The mystery is taking shape, like a painting emerging from a blank canvas, but the colours are still murky, the lines unclear. He thinks of Elise, her tear-streaked face, her lie about the button. He thinks of the priest, his trembling hands, his talk of guilt, and he thinks of the old road, its silence, its secrets. What would you do in a world like this, where trust is as scarce as sunlight? The next day dawns grey, the fog thinner but still present, like a veil drawn across the sky. Poirot walks to the market square, where villagers gather to trade what little they have. Potatoes blackened by blight, eggs small and fragile, scraps of cloth patched too many times. The air smells of damp straw and overripe fruit, and the sound of voices is subdued, a murmur rather than a chorus. He notices Klaas at once, a man whose fine coat and polished boots stand out like a peacock among sparrows. Klaas is tall, his hair slicked back, his smile too wide as he haggles with a woman over a sack of grain. Poirot approaches, his manner courteous, and introduces himself. Klaas's smile does not falter, but his eyes narrow slightly, a calculation hidden behind the charm. He speaks easily, his voice smooth as oil, claiming no ill will toward Pieter. "A stubborn boy," he says, shrugging. "But business is business. I offered a fair price for his land. He refused. That was the end of it." Poirot listens, his head tilted, and asks about the night Peter vanished. Klaas claims he was at home, alone, his house on the edge of the village. No one can confirm it, he admits, but his tone is defiant, as if daring Poirot to doubt him. The detective thanks him, his smile polite, and walks away, but he feels the merchant's gaze on his back, heavy as a stone. The market hums around him, but Poirot's mind is elsewhere, turning over Klaas's words, searching for the lie beneath the surface. He buys a small loaf of bread from a stall, its crust hard but its scent warm and yeasty, and breaks off a piece, the texture rough against his tongue. The taste is simple, almost comforting, but it reminds him of the village's hardship. Bread shared thinly, meals stretched to feed too many mouths. This is not the Flanders of grand estates or glittering ballrooms, but of hands cracked from cold, of children who grow up too fast, of nights spent listening for sounds that should not be. He walks toward Elise's home, a small house at the edge of the village, its roof sagging under the weight of years. The air here smells of peat and wet laundry, and the sound of a loom clacks faintly from inside. Elise opens the door, her face pale, her eyes wary. She invites him in, her voice quiet, and they sit at a table scarred by time. The room is dim, lit only by a single window, and the air is cool, the walls damp to the touch. Poirot speaks gently, asking about Pieta, about the button, about Klaus. Elise's hands twist in her lap and she repeats her denial, but her voice trembles, and Poirot sees the fear in her eyes, not just for Peter, but for herself. He leans forward, his tone soft as a lullaby, and tells her he seeks only the truth, that he believes Peter deserved better than to vanish into the fog. Elise's eyes fill with tears, and she whispers that Peter had found something he wouldn't tell her, something that frightened him. "He said he'd protect me," she says, her voice breaking. "But he rode out that night and he didn't come back." Poirot nods, his heart heavy, and asks about the button again. This time Elise hesitates, then admits it might belong to Klaus. "I saw him wear a coat with buttons like that," she says, almost too quietly to hear. "But I'm not sure. I swear it." The loom clacks in the silence, and Poirot rises, thanking her, his manner kind but his mind alight. The button, Klaus, Peter's fear. The pieces are falling into place, but the picture is still incomplete. He steps outside, the air sharp against his face, and looks toward the old road, its path hidden in the mist. The village is watching, he knows, waiting for him to unravel its secrets or to fail. He adjusts his hat, his fingers brushing the brim, and begins to walk. His cane tapping softly, a steady rhythm in a world of uncertainty. The fog swirls, and the story deepens, drawing us further into the heart of St. Maria. What lies beyond the willows, where the old road stretches into shadow? What truth hides behind the villagers' fear? The afternoon light in St. Maria is a frail thing, barely piercing the fog that clings to the fields like a lover reluctant to let go. Hercule Poirot walks along a narrow path beyond the village, where the earth turns marshy and the air grows sharp with the scent of stagnant water and wild mint. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, sink slightly into the mud, and he frowns, not at the mess but at the disorder of it all. The world here is untidy, chaotic, a stark contrast to the symmetry he craves. Yet it is in this chaos he knows that the truth often hides. Can you hear the soft squelch of the ground beneath his steps? The distant croak of a frog hidden in the reeds? The Flanders lowlands hold their secrets close, whispering them only to those who listen. Poirot's destination is the farmhouse of Peter's family, a low stone building half swallowed by ivy, its windows small and clouded with grime. The air around it smells of hay and livestock, a faint animal warmth undercut by the damp chill of autumn. He knocks, and the door opens to reveal Peter's mother, Anna, a woman whose face is a map of grief, her eyes sunken, her hands rough as the bark of the willow trees. She invites him in, her voice barely above a whisper, and the room inside is dim, lit by a single lamp that casts long shadows across the walls. The air tastes faintly of boiled cabbage, a meagre meal simmering on the stove, and the wooden table is worn smooth by years of use, its surface cool under Poirot's gloved fingers. Anna speaks of her son, her words slow and heavy, each one carrying the weight of loss. Peter was her only child, she says, a boy who loved the fields, who dreamed of a life beyond the village but stayed for her sake. She tells of his kindness, how he'd share his bread with the children who had none, how he'd sing old Flemish songs to calm the cows at dusk. But her voice falters when Poirot asks about the night he vanished. He was troubled, she says, her hands twisting a frayed cloth. He'd found something in the fields near the old road. Wouldn't tell me what. Said it was dangerous. Her eyes meet Poirot's, and for a moment they hold a plea, not just for answers but for peace. Poirot listens, his head tilted slightly, his moustache a perfect curve against his calm expression. He asks about the button, showing it to her, its tarnished surface glinting in the lamplight. Anna's breath catches and she nods, her voice trembling. "It's like the ones on Klaus's coat," she says. "I saw him wear it at the market last spring, but Peter, he wouldn't have fought with Klaus. He wasn't like that." Poirot nods, tucking the button away, but his mind is alight with questions. A dangerous discovery, a merchant's ambition, a boy lost in the fog. The threads are weaving together, but the pattern remains elusive. He thanks Anna, his manner gentle, and steps outside where the air is colder now, the fog curling like smoke around the farmhouse. The fields stretch out, vast and silent, their edges blurred by mist. Poirot walks toward the old road again, drawn to it as if it calls his name. The path is narrower here, flanked by ditches where water glints darkly, and the sound of his cane is muffled by the soft earth. He pauses at a spot where the grass is flattened, as if something heavy passed through, and kneels to examine the ground. His fingers brush against a shard of glass, small and jagged, its edge catching the faint light. It smells faintly of oil, not the kind used in lamps, but something sharper, mechanical. Another clue, another piece of the puzzle. As he stands, a sound breaks the silence. A low, rhythmic thud, like footsteps in the distance. He turns, but the fog is too thick, swallowing shapes and sounds alike. For a moment he imagines the headless horseman, a shadow moving through the mist, but he shakes the thought away. His mind is not swayed by tales, only by evidence. Yet the air feels heavier now, the silence deeper, and he quickened his pace, his cane tapping faster. What would it be like to walk these fields alone, knowing something watches from the fog? The thought lingers as he returns to the village, the lights of St. Maria faint pinpricks in the gloom. Back in the village, Poirot seeks out the blacksmith, a man named Hendrik, whose forge glows like a beacon at the edge of the square. The air here is thick with the smell of hot metal and charcoal, the heat a sharp contrast to the chill outside. Hendrik is a giant of a man, his arms scarred from sparks, his face red from the fire's glow. He greets Poirot with a grunt, his hammer pausing mid-strike, and listens as the detective asks about Peter, about the old road, about anything unusual. Hendrik is gruff, his words clipped, but he admits to seeing Peter the day before he vanished, repairing a horseshoe at the forge. He was nervous, Hendrik says, wiping sweat from his brow, kept looking over his shoulder like he expected trouble. Poirot asks about class, and Hendrik's eyes narrow. "That merchant's got no love for us," he says. "Always sniffing around, wanting land, wanting power. Peter stood up to him, not many do." The hammer falls again, a loud clang that echoes in the small space, and Poirot feels the vibration in his chest. He asks about the glass shard, showing it to Hendrik, but the blacksmith shakes his head, claiming no knowledge of it. Yet there's a flicker in his eyes, a moment of recognition quickly hidden, and Poirot stores it away. Another note in his mental ledger. The day fades into evening, and Poirot returns to the inn, his coat damp from the mist, his mind buzzing with fragments of truth. The inn is quieter tonight, the hearth fire low, the air heavy with the scent of burnt wood and stale bread. He sits at his usual table, a cup of weak tea before him, its bitterness sharp on his tongue. The villagers are wary of him now, their glances sharper, their voices hushed. He feels their fear, their suspicion, but also their hope. Hope that he, this small man with his impeccable manners, might bring order to their chaos. He opens his notebook, the candlelight casting soft shadows across the page, and writes, the button, the glass, Peter's discovery, Class's ambition, Elise's fear, Anna's grief, Hendrik's hesitation. Each is a thread, and Poirot knows that to pull one is to unravel the whole. But which thread to pull first? He sips his tea, the warmth spreading through him, and looks out the window where the fog presses close, a living thing. The mystery is growing, its roots deep in the soil of Sainte Maria, and Poirot feels its pull as inevitable as the tide. The night is still, save for the soft creak of the inn sign swaying in the wind. What lies hidden in the heart of this village, where fear wears the face of a ghost? What did Peter find that cost him his life? The evening wraps Sainte Maria in a hush, as if the village holds its breath against the weight of its own secrets. Hercule Poirot sits by the inn's window, the glass fogged with his breath. the world beyond reduced to a blur of grey and shadow. The tea in his cup has gone cold, its surface reflecting the flicker of the candle, and the air carries the faint, acrid bite of tallow and the earthier scent of damp wool from his coat hung by the fire to dry. His fingers trace the edge of the glass shard in his pocket, its jagged surface a silent question. The village is a tapestry of half-truths, and Poirot feels the threads slipping through his grasp, each one leading deeper into the mist. Can you imagine the stillness of such a night, where every creak of the floorboards feels like a confession? He rises, his movements precise despite the weariness that tugs at his bones, and steps into the night. The air is sharp, slicing through his scarf with a chill that smells of frost and distant peat fires. The cobbles underfoot are slick, their uneven surfaces a challenge to his polished shoes, and the sound of his cane is a soft tap swallowed by the fog. Poirot is drawn not to the old road tonight, but to the edge of the village, where a small chapel stands, its stone walls blackened by time. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, a place where prayers are whispered and fears left unspoken. He wonders if Peter came here, seeking solace or answers, before the fog claimed him. The chapel door is heavy, its hinges groaning as Poirot steps inside. The air is thick with the scent of old incense and wax, the pews worn smooth by generations of hands. A single candle burns on the altar, its flame trembling in the draught, and the silence is so deep it feels like a weight on his chest. He sits, his gloved hands folded, and lets the quiet settle over him. The chapel is not grand, not like the cathedrals of Brussels or Paris, but it is honest, its stones bearing the marks of a people who have endured. The floor is cold beneath his feet, the air tasting faintly of dust and prayer, and Poirot wonders what it must be like to seek comfort here, in a world where survival is a daily bargain with fate. A soft sound breaks his thoughts. Footsteps, hesitant at the back of the chapel. He turns, his eyes sharp, and sees a figure in the shadows, a young boy no more than 12, his clothes patched and his face pale. The boy's name, Poirot learns, is Lucas, a shepherd's son who tends the flocks near the old road. His voice is small, trembling like the candle flame, as he speaks of seeing something the night Peter vanished. "It wasn't a ghost," Lucas says, his eyes wide. "It was a man, I swear it. Tall, in a dark coat, near the willows. He had a lantern, but it went out, and then I heard a scream." Poirot leans forward, his voice gentle as a lullaby, coaxing the boy to say more. Lucas tells of running home, too afraid to look back, of telling no one until now, for fear of being called a liar. He speaks of Pieter, who once gave him an apple from his pocket, a small kindness in a world that offers few. Poirot asks about the man in the coat, about the lantern, and Lucas shakes his head, his hands twisting together. "I didn't see his face," he whispers. "But the coat, it was fine, like the merchant's." Poirot's heart quickens, though his face remains calm, and he thinks of class, of the button, of the glass shard that smells of oil. He thanks Lucas, pressing a coin into the boy's hand, and watches him slip back into the night, a shadow among shadows. The chapel feels colder now, the candle's light weaker, and Poirot rises, his cane tapping softly as he steps outside. The fog is thicker, curling around the chapel like a living thing, and the air smells of wet stone and something sharper, like fear. He walks toward the village square, his mind turning over Lucas's words, the scream, the lantern. A man, not a ghost, but a man with a purpose. The mystery is no longer just a puzzle. It is a wound, raw and bleeding, in the heart of St. Maria. In the square the gas lamps flicker, their light struggling against the mist. Poirot pauses by the fountain, its water still and dark, and notices a woman watching him from across the square. She's older, her shawl drawn tight, her face lined with years of toil. Her eyes are sharp, almost defiant. Poirot approaches, his hat tipped politely, and learns her name is Marguerite, a weaver who knows every family in the village. She speaks bluntly, her voice rough as the wool she works, and tells him of rumours, of Klaas's wealth, how it came too quickly, how he buys land from those too desperate to refuse. Peter wouldn't sell, she says, her lips tight, and now he's gone. You tell me what that means. Poirot listens, his head tilted, his eyes never leaving her face. He asks about the old road, about the stories of the headless horseman, and Margaret scoffs through her eyes flickering with unease. Tales to scare children, she says, but something's wrong out there. The air feels heavy, like it's waiting. She pauses, then adds, Peter was poking around where he shouldn't. Found something, maybe. Something someone didn't want to find. Poirot asks about the glass shard, showing it to her, and Marguerite's brow furrows. Could be from a lantern, she says, the kind Klaas uses when he walks the fields at night. The night deepens, and Poirot feels the weight of her words, each one a stone added to the pile of evidence. He thanks her, his manner as courteous as ever, and walks back to the inn, the fog swirling around him like a cloak. The night in St. Maria is a deep, restless thing, its silence broken only by the soft patter of rain against the inn's windows, each drop a fleeting thought in the stillness. Hercule Poirot lies awake, his eyes tracing the wooden beams of his room's ceiling, where shadows shift like memories. The air is cool, scented with the faint trace of candle wax and the stub he extinguished hours ago, its smoky aftertaste lingering like a ghost. The mattress beneath him is lumpy, its straw poking through the thin sheet, a reminder of the village's meagre comforts. His mind, however, is far from rest, turning over the clues that pile like stones in his thoughts. The button, the glass shard, the boy's tale of a man in the fog, the whispers of Klaas's ambition. Can you feel the weight of such a night, where sleep eludes you and the world outside seems to hold its breath? Morning comes slowly, the sky a dull pewter, the rain now a drizzle that slicks the cobbles and drips from the eaves. Poirot steps into the village, his umbrella a small shield against the damp, his scarf tight against the chill that smells of wet earth and faint coal smoke. The streets are quiet, save for the splash of his shoes and the distant clatter of a cart, its wheels groaning under a load of turnips. The air tastes of mist and mud, a flavour that clings to the tongue, and the cold seeps through his gloves, making his fingers ache. This is not the Flanders of poets, but of labourers, where every day is a negotiation with the elements, where warmth is a luxury, and hunger a constant shadow. The air is colder now, the scent of frost sharper, and the sound of his footsteps is a lonely echo in the empty square. Inside the inn, the fire is low, the room quiet save for the soft clink of glasses as Jan cleans the bar. Poirot sits, his notebook open, and writes. The boy's story, the lantern, Marguerite's suspicions, the glass shard. Each clue is a step closer to the truth, but the path is winding, shadowed by doubt. He sips a fresh cup of tea, its warmth a small comfort against the chill, and thinks of the village, its people, its secrets. The hardship here is not just in the meagre meals or the worn clothes, but in the silence, the way fear has woven itself into the fabric of their lives. What would it be like to live in such a place, where every glance carries a question, every shadow a threat? The fog presses against the window, and Poirot feels its weight, its insistence, as if it too wants the truth to stay hidden. But Hercule Poirot is not a man to be swayed by fog or fear. He closes his notebook, his fingers brushing the cover, and looks out into the night. The mystery is a tapestry, and he is pulling at its threads one by one. Somewhere in St. Maria the truth waits, cloaked in shadow but not beyond his reach. The night is deep, the village silent, and the story moves forward, carrying us into its heart. Close your eyes, dear listener, and let the mist guide you further, into the quiet corners where secrets sleep. Poirot's destination is the home of Klaas, the merchant, a house that stands apart from the village's humble stone cottages. It is larger, its timbered walls freshly painted, its windows framed with curtains that hint at wealth. The air around it carries the faint scent of polished wood and wax, a stark contrast to the village's earthy dampness. He knocks, and the door opens to reveal Klaas himself, his smile as polished as his boots, his eyes sharp despite the early hour. The merchant invites him in, his voice smooth, and they sit in a parlour where a fire crackles, its heat a rare comfort. The room smells of leather and pipe tobacco, the furniture solid and new, a display of prosperity that feels almost defiant in this place of want. Klaas speaks easily, offering tea that steams in fine porcelain cups, its flavour bitter but warming. He claims ignorance of Peter's fate, repeating his story of a refused offer, a simple disagreement, nothing more. The boy was stubborn, he says, his hands spread as if in regret, but I wished him no harm. This talk of ghosts, it's nonsense, surely you see that. Poirot sips his tea, his eyes never leaving Klaas's face, and asks about the night Peter vanished. Klaas insists he was here, alone, his lantern unlit, his coat hung by the door. But Poirot notices the merchant's fingers, how they tap lightly on the arm of his chair, a rhythm too quick for calm. He produces the glass shard, holding it delicately, its edge glinting in the firelight. "From a lantern, perhaps?" he asks, his voice soft as a breeze. Klaas's smile falters just for a moment before he shrugs. "Could be anything," he says. "The fields are full of broken things." Poirot nods, tucking the shard away, but his mind is all right. He asks about the button, describing its carved pattern, and Klaas laughs, a sound too loud for the quiet room. "I have many coats," he says. "Buttons come and go. You're grasping at straws, monsieur." But Poirot sees the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flick to the window, as if expecting something to appear in the mist. The conversation ends politely, but the air is heavier now, charged with unspoken truths. Poirot steps outside, the drizzle cool against his face, the scent of rain sharper now, mingled with the faint tang of smoke from the village chimneys. He walks toward the fields, drawn again to the old road, where the willows stand like mourners, their branches trailing in the wind. The ground is softer here, the rain turning it to mud that clings to his shoes, and the air is thick with the smell of wet grass and decay. He pauses at the spot where he found the glass shard, his eyes scanning the ground, searching for anything the fog might have missed. A glint catches his eye, half buried in the mud. A small metal clasp, rusted but intact, its shape suggesting a belt or a saddle. It smells faintly of leather and oil, the same sharp note as the glass shard, and Poirot tucks it into his pocket, his heart quickening. The clues are mounting, each one a whisper of the truth, but the mystery remains a shadow, elusive and taunting. He stands, his umbrella tilted against the rain, and looks down the old road, where the fog pools like a living thing. What would you do in such a place, where every step feels like a challenge to the village is stirring now, its people moving through the drizzle with the slow determination of those who know no other way? Poirot returns to the square where a small crowd gathers around a peddler's cart. Its wares meagre, a few apples, some bolts of rough cloth, a handful of nails. The air smells of overripe fruit and damp wool, and the sound of voices is low, a murmur of necessity rather than joy. He notices Elise in the crowd, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes downcast as she barters for a small sack of flour. He approaches, his manner gentle, and asks if she might walk with him a moment. "Doen." They move to the edge of the square where the fountain stands, its water rippling under the rain. Elise's hands are red from the cold, her breath visible as she speaks. She tells him of Peter's last days, how he grew quiet, how he'd stare at the fields as if seeing something she could not. "He found papers," she says, her voice barely above a whisper, "in the old barn near the road. He wouldn't show me, but he said they were important, dangerous." Poirot's eyes sharpen, though his face remains kind, and he asks about the barn, about Klaas, about anything that might connect the dots. Elise shakes her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know," she says, "but I'm afraid. For him, for me, for all of us." Poirot offers his handkerchief, its edges crisp despite the damp, and tells her to be careful, to trust no one until the truth is found. She nods, clutching the flour sack, and slips back into the crowd, a small figure swallowed by the grey. The rain falls harder now, a soft drumbeat against his umbrella, and Poirot feels the weight of her fear, her grief, as if it were his own. This is not a village of heroes or villains, but of people, each carrying their own burdens, each hiding their own truths. He walks to the old barn Elise mentioned, a sagging structure at the edge of the fields, its roof half collapsed, its walls weathered to a dull grey. The air inside is musty, thick with the smell of mould and old straw, and the floor creaks underfoot, soft with rot. The light is dim, filtering through cracks in the walls, and Poirot moves carefully, his eyes scanning the shadows. He finds nothing at first, only dust and cobwebs, but then, in a corner, beneath a pile of rotting sacks, he sees a glint of paper, yellowed and brittle. It is a ledger, its pages filled with numbers and names. Some he recognises: Class, Peter, others from the village. The ink is smudged, but the intent is clear. Transactions, debts, land changing hands. Poirot tucks the ledger inside his coat, his heart racing, and steps outside, the rain cool against his face. The fog is returning, curling around the barn like a shroud, and the air feels heavier, as if the world itself is watching. The ledger is a key, he knows, but to what lock? The mystery is deepening, its roots spreading through the village, and Poirot feels its pull, a tide he cannot resist. The day is fading, the light softer now, and he begins the walk back to the inn, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the earth. The story moves forward, dear listener, carrying us deeper into the heart of St. Maria. What secrets lie within those brittle pages? What truth waits in the shadows of the old road? The dusk settles over St. Maria like a sigh, softening the edges of the village until it seems to blur into the fog itself. Hercule Poirot walks slowly back from the old barn, the ledger tucked safely inside his coat, its weight both a burden and a promise. The rain has stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and the faint, sweet decay of fallen leaves. His cane sinks slightly into the muddy path, each step a quiet protest against the disorder of this place, and the chill bites at his fingertips, even through his gloves. The fields around him are silent, save for the soft rustle of reeds bending in the breeze, a sound that feels like a whisper of secrets yet untold. Can you picture the stillness of such an evening, where the world holds its breath, waiting for the truth to surface? Poirot's mind is a whirl of fragments. The button, the glass shard, the metal clasp, and now the ledger. Its pages filled with names and numbers that hint at something larger, something hidden beneath the village's weary surface. The cobbles of St. Maria gleam faintly under the gas lamps as he enters the village, their light casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the stones. The air tastes of damp stone and distant smoke, a reminder of the fires that burn low in every home, their warmth rationed against the cold. This is a place of survival, where every scrap of wood, every morsel of food is measured carefully, where the scars of war linger not just in the earth, but in the lines of every face. He pauses at the edge of the square, where a small group of villagers gathers, their voices low, their hands busy with the day's final tasks. A woman mends a torn shawl, her needle glinting in the lamplight, while a man unloads a cart of firewood, his breath visible in the chill. Poirot watches them, his eyes sharp, noting the way they avoid looking toward the old road, as if its very existence is a weight they cannot bear. He thinks of the ledger, of Peter's discovery, and wonders what it was that drove a young man to ride into the fog, never to return. His thoughts are interrupted by a figure approaching through the mist. The priest, Father Lucas, his thin frame wrapped in a worn cassock, his hands clasped as if in perpetual prayer. The priest's face is pale, his eyes shadowed, and he greets Poirot with a nod, his voice soft but strained. "You're stirring things, monsieur," he says, his breath catching slightly. "The village is uneasy. They fear you'll bring more than answers." Poirot tilts his head, his moustache a perfect curve, and asks what the priest means. Father Lucas hesitates, then speaks of whispers in the confessional, of sins unspoken, of a fear that the headless horseman is not just a tale but a judgment. Poirot listens, his expression calm but his mind racing. He asks about Peter, about the ledger, and the priest's hands tremble, his fingers twisting together. "Peter came to me," he says, his voice barely audible. Days before he vanished. He was afraid, said he'd found something in the barn, something that could ruin someone. He wouldn't say what, but he asked for guidance, for protection. The priest's eyes meet Poirot's, and for a moment they hold a flicker of guilt, as if he feels he failed the boy. Poirot asks gently about class, about the merchant's dealings, and Father Lucas shakes his head. The conversation ends as the priest hurries away, his cassock flapping in the breeze, and Poirot stands alone in the square, the fog curling around him like a living thing. The air is colder now, the scent of frost sharper, and he feels the weight of the ledger against his chest, its pages a map to the truth he seeks. He returns to the inn, where the fire has dwindled to embers, the room heavy with the smell of burnt wood and stale ale. Jeanne, the innkeeper, watches him from behind the bar, his eyes wary, and Poirot wonders what secrets he too might hold. The floorboards creak underfoot, their texture rough through the soles of his shoes, and the air tastes faintly of dust, a reminder of the village's age, its weariness. In his room, Poirot sits at the small desk, the ledger open before him, its pages yellowed and brittle under the candle's glow. The names are familiar. Klaas, Peter, Anna, even Hendrik the blacksmith, and the numbers suggest debts, payments, land sold or promised. But there are other names, strangers to the village, and sums that seem too large for this place of poverty. Poirot's fingers trace the ink, his mind piecing together the puzzle. Peter found this, he thinks, and it frightened him. But why? What did these numbers mean to a farmer's son? The candle flickers, casting shadows that dance like spectres, and Poirot feels the mystery deepening, its roots tangled in the soil of St. Maria. He closes the ledger, his movements precise, and steps to the window, where the fog presses close, a grey veil that muffles the world. The night is quiet, save for the soft drip of water from the eaves, and Poirot thinks of the villagers, their lives bound by hardship, their hopes dimmed by fear. What would it be like to live in such a place, where every day is a battle against want, where secrets are buried deeper than the roots of the willows? He adjusts his scarf, his fingers brushing the fabric, and resolves to visit the old road again, to search the barn by daylight, to find the truth that Peter died for. The next morning dawns grey, the fog thinner but still present, like a memory that refuses to fade. Poirot walks to the fields, his coat buttoned against the chill, his cane a steady rhythm against the earth. The air smells of wet grass and distant smoke, and the ground is soft, clinging to his shoes with every step. He reaches the barn, its sagging roof a silhouette against the sky, and steps inside, the air thick with the scent of mould and old straw. The light is stronger now, filtering through the cracks, and he searches carefully, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. In a pile of debris he finds something new, a scrap of cloth, dark and finely woven, torn at the edge as if caught on something sharp. It smells faintly of oil, the same sharp note as the glass shard and the metal clasp, and Poirot tucks it away, his heart quickening. The barn is a place of secrets, he realises, a place where Peter stumbled upon something that cost him his life. He steps outside, the air cool against his face, and looks toward the old road, where the willows sway in the breeze, their branches whispering of things unseen. As he walks back to the village, he notices a figure watching from a distance. Hendrik the blacksmith, his massive frame unmistakable even in the fog. Hendrik turns away quickly, disappearing into the mist, and Poirot feels a prickle of unease, not fear but curiosity. The blacksmith knows something, he thinks, something he cannot or will not say. The village is closing in around him, its secrets tightening like a noose, but Poirot is undeterred. He is Hercule Poirot, and he will bring order to this chaos, light to this shadow. The day fades, the fog thickening once more, and Poirot feels the weight of the mystery, its pull as strong as the tide. The story is far from over, dear listener, its threads weaving tighter with every step. What lies hidden in the barn shadows? The afternoon light in Santa Maria is a fragile thread, weaving through the fog to touch the village with a faint silver glow. Hercule Poirot stands at the edge of the fields, the scrap of cloth in his gloved hand, its dark fibres catching the muted sun. The air is sharp with the scent of damp hay, and the faint acrid tang of charcoal drifting from the blacksmith's forge, a reminder of the village's ceaseless labour. His shoes, no longer pristine, bear the mud of the old road, and the ground beneath him is uneven, its texture a quiet challenge to his need for order. The willows in the distance sway gently, their branches trailing like mourners' veils, and the soft hum of the wind carries a hint of something unspoken. Can you feel the chill of such a moment? Where the whirl Poirot tucks the cloth into his pocket alongside the button, the glass shard, the metal clasp, and the ledger, each a fragment of the mystery that consumes him. He turns toward the village, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the earth, and feels the weight of eyes watching from unseen windows, their gazes heavy with suspicion and hope. The cobbles of St. Maria are slick from the morning's drizzle, reflecting the gas lamps that flicker to life as dusk approaches, and the air tastes of frost and faint bread, baked sparingly in ovens that know scarcity too well. This is a place where every meal is a calculation, every fire a luxury, where the war's end has brought not peace but a different kind of struggle. His steps lead him to the blacksmith's forge, where the air is thick with the smell of hot iron and sweat, the heat a sharp contrast to the chill outside. Hendrik stands at the anvil, his hammer poised, his face flushed from the fire's glow. The forge is a world of its own, its walls blackened by soot, its floor littered with metal scraps that clink underfoot. Poirot greets him politely, his voice soft but clear, and asks about the night Peter vanished, about the cloth, about the ledger. Hendrik's hammer falls, a loud clang that echoes in the small space, and his eyes narrow, though he does not look at Poirot. "You ask too many questions," he says, his voice rough as the iron he shapes. "This village has enough troubles without you digging up more." Poirot tilts his head, his moustache a perfect curve, and presses gently, his words like a breeze stirring still water. He mentions the cloth, describing its fine weave, and Hendrik's hammer pauses just for a moment before striking again. "Could be anyone's," the blacksmith says, but his voice is tighter now, and Poirot sees the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands grip the hammer. He asks about class, about the merchant's visits to the forge, and Hendrik grunts, admitting class had a horse shod the week Peter disappeared. "Paid well," he says, his eyes on the anvil. "Too well, maybe." Poirot nods, storing the words away, and thanks him, his manner courteous despite the blacksmith's gruffness. Outside the air is cooler, the fog creeping back like a tide, and Poirot feels the weight of Hendrik's hesitation, a crack in the village's silence. He walks toward the church, drawn by a need to speak with Father Lucas again, to probe the guilt he saw in the priest's eyes. The church is quiet, its stone walls damp to the touch, and the air inside is heavy with the scent of wax and old prayer books, their pages curling with age. Father Lucas is at the altar, lighting a candle, his hands trembling slightly as he turns to greet Poirot. The detective speaks softly, asking about Peter's confession, about the ledger, about the fear that grips the village like a fever. The priest's voice is low, almost a whisper, as he tells of Peter's visit, how the boy spoke of a wrong he'd uncovered, something that threatened not just him but the village itself. He wouldn't say more, Father Lucas says, his eyes fixed on the candle flame. But he was afraid, not just for himself but for Elise, for his mother. He asked me to pray for him. Poirot listens, his expression calm, and asks about class, about the names in the ledger. The priest hesitates, his fingers twisting together, and admits to seeing class at the church late at night, weeks before Peter vanished. He prayed, Father Lucas says, his voice faltering, but his prayers, they felt like bargains, not devotion. Poirot thanks him, his voice gentle, and steps outside where the fog is thicker now, wrapping the church in a shroud. The air smells of wet stone and distant wood smoke, and the silence is broken only by the soft toll of the church bell, a single note that lingers like a sigh. He thinks of the ledger, its pages a map of greed, and wonders what bargain class struck, what price was paid in the shadows of St. Maria. The village is a puzzle, its pieces scattered, and Poirot feels the weight of it, each clue a step closer to the truth, but a heavier one to bear. He returns to the inn, where the fire is low, the room quiet save for the soft murmur of voices from the bar. Jeanne pours a tankard of ale, his eyes flicking to Poirot as the detective sits at his usual table, a small loaf of bread before him, its crust hard but warm. The bread breaks easily, its texture rough against his tongue, and the taste is simple, a reminder of the village's hardship where every bite is earned through toil. Poirot opens the ledger, its pages catching the candlelight, and studies the entries again, his fingers tracing the names. There is a pattern here, he realizes, a rhythm of debts and sales that points not just to class but to others, perhaps even beyond the village. A shadow falls across the table, and Poirot looks up to see Marguerite, the weaver, her shawl pulled tight, her face etched with worry. She speaks quickly, her voice low, and tells him of a stranger seen in the fields, weeks before Peter vanished, a man in a dark coat. Not from St. Maria. In his room, Poirot sits at the desk, the ledger open before him, its pages catching the candlelight. He studies the entries again, noting a name that appears repeatedly. Vandermeer. Not a villager, but someone with a city address. Perhaps the stranger Marguerite saw. The sums beside the name are large, tied to land sales, and Poirot wonders what connection this man has to class, to Peter, to the fog that hides the truth. He adds the scrap of cloth to his collection of clues, its oil-scented fibres are linked to the glass shard and the metal clasp, and feels the puzzle taking shape, its edges sharper, but its centre still blurred. The night is deep, the inn silent save for the soft creak of the building settling, and Poirot steps to the window where the fog presses close, a grey veil that muffles the world. He thinks of the villagers, their lives bound by toil, their hopes dimmed by fear. What would it be like to live in such a place, where trust is a luxury, where every secret carries a price? The candle flickers, casting shadows across the room, and Poirot feels the mystery's pulse, its rhythm steady beneath the chaos. He resolves to find Vandermeer, to trace the stranger's path, to uncover the truth that Peter died for. The fog outside is a challenge, but Poirot is undeterred, his mind as sharp as ever, his heart set on justice. The village sleeps, its secrets buried deep, but the truth is stirring, ready to rise like the dawn. Poirot closes the ledger, his fingers brushing the cover, and prepares for the day ahead, knowing the old road holds more answers, waiting in the mist. The morning in St. Maria dawns with a reluctant light, the fog thinning just enough to reveal the village's weary bones. Hercule Poirot stands at the inn's doorstep, his coat buttoned tight, his breath a faint cloud in the chill air. The scent of damp straw and distant peat fires lingers, mingling with the faint bitterness of coal dust that settles on the tongue. His cane rests lightly against the cobbles, their slick surface cold and unyielding, and the soft clatter of a passing cart echoes in the stillness, a reminder of the village's quiet struggle. The mystery weighs on him, its clues, the button, the glass shard, the metal clasp, the scrap of cloth, the ledger, a constellation of truths yet to be connected. Can you feel the hush of such a morning, where every sound seems to carry a hidden meaning? Poirot's thoughts turn to Vandermeer. the stranger whose name recurs in the ledger, a shadow from beyond the village. He resolves to trace this man, to unravel his connection to Klaas and Peter's fate. His steps lead him to the village's small post office, a cramped building where the air smells of ink and old paper, its wooden counter scarred by years of use. The postmaster, a wiry man named Thomas, greets him with a nod, his eyes curious but guarded. Poirot asks about letters to or from Vandermeer, his voice soft but precise, and Thomas hesitates, his fingers brushing a stack of envelopes. There were letters, he says, his voice low, from Bruges, addressed to Klaas. I don't read them, but they came often, before Peter vanished. Poirot leans forward, his eyes sharp, and asks about the dates, the handwriting, anything unusual. Thomas admits one letter arrived the day before Peter's disappearance, its envelope sealed with red wax, a detail that stands out in a village where such flourishes are rare. The postmaster's hands tremble slightly, and Poirot senses fear, not just of him, but of what these letters might mean. He thanks Thomas, his manner courteous, and steps outside, where the air is sharp with frost, the ground beneath his feet hard with the morning's chill. The village is walking slowly, its people moving through the fog with the weight of routine, their hands raw from work, their faces etched with the hardship of survival. He walks to the edge of the village where the fields stretch toward the old road, their expanse broken by clumps of reeds and twisted willows. The air here smells of wet earth and faint decay, and the ground is soft, sucking at his shoes with every step. Poirot pauses at a ditch, its water dark and still, and notices a glint in the mud. A small key, its surface rusted but its shape intricate, suggesting a lock beyond the village's simple means. It smells faintly of the oil, a familiar note that ties it to the glass shard, the clasp and the cloth, and Poirot tucks it away, his heart quickening. The old road feels closer now, its secrets almost tangible, and he wonders what lock this key might open, what truth it might reveal. As he stands, a figure approaches through the fog. Willem, the farmer, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. His voice is gruff, his eyes avoiding Poirot's as he speaks of the fields, of Peter's love for the land, of the merchant's greed. Klaas wanted more than Peter's fields, he says, his hands clenched. He wanted control over all of us. Poirot listens, his head tilted, and asks about the stranger, about meetings in the fields. Willem hesitates, then admits to seeing Klaas with a man weeks ago near the barn. Didn't know him, he says, but he wasn't from here. Too fine, too tall. They argued, I think. The farmer's words are heavy, and Poirot feels the mystery tightening, its threads drawing closer. He thanks Willem, his voice gentle, and walks back toward the village, the key heavy in his pocket, the ledger's weight as constant reminder. The air is colder now, the fog curling like smoke, and the sound of his cane is a soft tap against the earth, a rhythm that steadies his thoughts. The village is a place of endurance, where every day is a battle against want, where trust is as scarce as sunlight. What would it be like to carry such a burden, to know your neighbour's secrets but fear to speak them? Back in the square, Poirot notices Elise lingering near the fountain, her shawl damp, her face pale. He approaches, his manner kind, and asks about the key, showing it to her in the pale light. Her eyes widen, and she whispers that Peter had a box, hidden in the barn, where he kept things he didn't want found. He showed me once, she says, her voice trembling. It was small, metal, locked tight. He said it was his future. Poirot's heart quickens, though his face remains calm, and he asks about Klaas, about the stranger. Elise shakes her head, her hands twisting together. Peter didn't trust Klaas, she says. He said the merchant was working with someone dangerous. She hurries away, her figure fading into the fog, and Poirot stands alone, the fountain's soft drip a counterpoint to his thoughts. The key, the box, the ledger. The pieces are aligning, but the truth remains just out of reach. He returns to the inn, where the air is warm but heavy, scented with burnt wood and stale bread. Jeanne watches him from the bar, his eyes unreadable, and Poirot sits at his table, the ledger open before him, its pages a map of greed and betrayal. He studies the entries, noting Vandermeer's name again, tied to sums that suggest not just land but something more, something worth killing for. The day fades, the fog thickening, and Poirot feels the mystery's pulse, its rhythm stronger now. He thinks of Peter, a boy who dreamed of a better life, who found a truth too heavy to bear. The village is quiet, its people bound by fear, but Poirot is undeterred, his mind a beacon in the mist. He closes the ledger, his fingers brushing the cover, and prepares to return to the barn, to find the box that might unlock the truth. The twilight over St. Maria casts a soft veil, blurring the village into a tapestry of shadows and faint light. Hercule Poirot moves through the fields, his steps deliberate despite the mud that clings to his shoes, the small key heavy in his pocket like a promise yet unfulfilled. The air is thick with the scent of wet grass and distant wood smoke, a faint bitterness lingering on the tongue, and the willows along the old road sway gently, their branches whispering secrets to the dusk. The ground is soft, yielding under his cane's tip, and the silence is broken only by the low croak of frogs hidden in the ditches. Can you sense the weight of such a moment, where the earth itself seems to hold its breath, guarding truths beneath its surface? Poirot's destination is the old barn, its sagging silhouette a dark smudge against the fading sky. The ledger, the key, Peter's box, they draw him here, to this place of decay and memory. The barn's door creaks as he enters, the air inside heavy with the musty smell of rotting straw and damp wood, its texture rough under his gloved fingers as he brushes against a beam. The light is dim, filtering through gaps in the roof, and the floorboards groan softly, each step a quiet intrusion. He searches methodically, his eyes scanning the shadows until he finds it, a small metal box, half buried under a pile of mouldy sacks, its surface rusted but intact, its lock gleaming faintly in the twilight. He kneels, the ground cold and damp through his trousers, and fits the key into the lock. It turns with a soft click, a sound that feels louder in the stillness, and the lid opens to reveal a bundle of papers, their edges curled with age. The air smells faintly of ink and oil, and Poirot's heart quickens as he lifts the papers, their texture brittle against his fingers. They are letters, some in Peter's hand, others in an unfamiliar script, and they speak of land, of deals, of promises made in secret. One name stands out, Vandermeer, tied to transactions that hint at more than simple commerce, perhaps a scheme that cost Peter his life. Poirot tucks the letters into his coat, their weight a new burden, and steps outside where the fog is creeping back, curling around the barn like a lover's embrace. The air is colder now, the scent of frost sharp, and the silence feels heavier, as if the barn itself guards the secrets he's uncovered. He thinks of Peter, a boy who dreamed beyond these fields, who found a truth too dangerous to keep. The village is not just a place of hardship, but of betrayal, where trust is a luxury few can afford. What would it be like to hold such secrets, to know they could shatter the fragile peace of a place like this? As he walks back toward the village, the fog thickens, muffling the sound of his cane against the earth. A figure emerges from the mist, Hendrik the blacksmith, his massive frame looming like a statue. His face is flushed, not from the forge but from something else, and his voice is low, almost a growl as he speaks. "You're digging too deep, monsieur," he says, his hands clenched. "Some things are better left buried." Poirot tilts his head, his expression calm, and asks about the letters, about Vandermeer. Hendrik's eyes narrow, and he admits to seeing the stranger once near the barn speaking with Klaas. "They weren't friendly," he says. "Raised voices, sharp words. I didn't stay to listen." Poirot nods, his moustache a perfect curve, and thanks the blacksmith, though he senses the man's unease, a thread of fear woven into his gruffness. Hendrik turns away, disappearing into the fog, and Poirot continues toward the village, the letters heavy against his chest. The square is quiet, save for the soft drip of water from the fountain, and the air smells of damp stone and faint bread. A reminder of the village's meagre meals, shared sparingly among families who know hunger too well. He pauses by the church, its spire half lost in the mist, and sees Father Lucas at the door, his thin frame trembling as he lights a candle. The priest's eyes widen at Poirot's approach, and he speaks before the detective can ask, his voice a whisper. "I heard you found something," he says, his hands twisting together. "Be careful, monsieur. Peter found something too, and it took him." Poirot asks about the letters, about Vandermeer, and the priest shakes his head, his eyes fixed on the candle flame. "I only know Claes met a man from Bruges," he says. "He came to the church afterward, praying, but his prayers were angry." Poirot listens, his mind racing, and thanks the priest, his voice gentle despite the urgency he feels. The village is closing in, its secrets tightening like a web, and Poirot feels the truth drawing nearer, its shape almost clear. He returns to the inn, where the air is warm but heavy, scented with burnt wood and stale ale. Jeanne watches him from the bar, his eyes unreadable, and Poirot sits at his table, the letters spread before him, their ink faded but legible. They tell a story of greed, of land bought and sold, of debts that bind the village to a stranger's will. Vandermeer, it seems, is no mere merchant but a broker of power, and Claes his partner in St. Maria. Poirot sips a cup of tea, its bitterness sharp on his tongue, and thinks of the villagers, their lives shaped by toil and loss. The fog presses against the window, a grey curtain that hides the world, and he feels the mystery's weight, its pulse steady beneath the chaos. The letters are a map, but the destination is still unclear, and Poirot knows he must find Vandermeer, must confront Claes, must unravel the truth before the fog claims another soul. The night is deep, the inn quiet, and Poirot closes the letters, his fingers brushing the paper, ready for the dawn that will bring him closer to justice. The dawn in St. Maria creeps in softly, its light a pale whisper through the fog that blankets the village like a memory. Hercule Poirot sits at the inn's small desk, the letters from Peter's box spread before him, their ink catching the flicker of a single candle. The air is heavy with the scent of wax and old wood, the room's chill seeping through his coat, and the faint taste of last night's tea lingers on his tongue, bitter but grounding. Outside, the cobbles glisten with dew, their uneven surfaces slick underfoot, and the distant clatter of a milk pail echoes, a reminder of the village's quiet struggle to greet another day. Can you feel the hush of such a morning, where every breath seems to carry the weight of secrets? The letters tell a story of greed, of land sold under duress, of debts that bind St. Maria to a stranger named Vandermeer. Poirot's fingers trace the words, their texture brittle, and he sees the pattern clearly now. Claes, the merchant, is no mere opportunist, but a link in a chain that stretches beyond the village, to Bruges, to a man whose ambition casts a long shadow. The button, the glass shard, the metal clasp, the scrap of cloth, the key, each clue points to a truth Peter stumbled upon, a truth that cost him his life. Poirot closes the letters, his movements precise, and feels the mystery's pulse, its rhythm urging him toward the old road, where answers lie hidden in the mist. He steps outside, his scarf tight against the chill, the air sharp with the scent of frost and damp hay. The village is stirring, its people moving slowly, their hands raw from work, their faces etched with the weariness of survival. The ground is hard under his cane, its tip tapping a steady rhythm, and the fog swirls around him, muffling the sound of his steps. He heads toward the post office again, seeking Thomas, the postmaster, whose knowledge of Vandermeer's letters might hold another piece of the puzzle. The post office is cramped, its air thick with the smell of ink and dust, the counter worn smooth by countless hands. Thomas greets him warily, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone else. Poirot speaks gently, asking about the letters from Bruges, about the red wax seal, about any visitors who came for Claes. Thomas hesitates, his fingers brushing a stack of papers, and admits to seeing a man tall and finely dressed who collected a letter weeks ago. He didn't speak, Thomas says, his voice low. But he had a city look, not like us. Class met him outside, and they left together toward the fields. Poirot's eyes sharpen, though his face remains calm, and he asks about the man's coat, about anything that might match the cloth or the button. Thomas shakes his head, but his hands tremble, and Poirot senses fear, not just of the stranger, but of the truth itself. He thanks Thomas, his manner courteous, and steps into the square, where the air tastes of frost and faint bread, baked sparingly in ovens that know scarcity. The fountain's soft drip is a constant rhythm, and Poirot notices Marguerite, the weaver, lingering nearby, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes sharp with worry. He approaches, his voice soft as a lullaby, and asks about the stranger, about Klaas's dealings. Margaret's voice is low, her words careful, as she speaks of seeing the man again, near the old road, the night Peter vanished. He carried a lantern, she says, her hands twisting together. It flickered, then went out. I heard a shout, but I ran. I was afraid. Poirot listens, his head tilted, and asks about the ledger, about the land sales. Marguerite nods, her face pale. Klaas bought fields from those who couldn't pay, she says. But it wasn't just him. There was someone else, someone with money pulling strings. Poirot feels the puzzle tightening, its pieces aligning, and thanks her, his manner kind but his mind racing. The stranger, Van der Meer, is the key, he thinks, and Klaas his agent in St. Maria. The village is a web of greed, its threads woven through every home, every heart. He walks toward the old road, drawn by the need to see the place where Peter was last seen, where the lantern flickered and died. The air is colder here, the scent of wet earth and decay stronger, and the ground is soft, sucking at his shoes with every step. The willows loom, their branches trailing like ghosts, and the fog pools in the ditches, a grey tide that hides the truth. Poirot pauses at the spot where he found the glass shard, his eyes scanning the ground, and notices a faint mark in the mud. A hoof-print deep and clear, but beside it a smaller mark like a boot pressed hard into the earth. It smells faintly of oil, a familiar note, and Poirot kneels, his gloved fingers brushing the mark, his heart quickening. The clues are mounting, each one a step closer to the truth, but the mystery remains a shadow, its edges sharp but its centre blurred. Poirot stands, his cane planted in the earth, and thinks of Peter, a boy who loved these fields, who found a secret too heavy to bear. The village is not just a place of toil, but of betrayal, where every glance carries a weight, every silence a confession. What would it be like to walk these paths, knowing danger waits in the fog? He returns to the village, the air growing heavier as dusk approaches, the fog curling like smoke around the houses. At the inn, the fire is low, its warmth a faint comfort against the chill, and the air smells of burnt wood and stale ale. Jeanne watches him from the bar, his eyes unreadable, and Poirot sits at his table, the letters open before him, their words a map of deceit. He studies them again, noting a date that matches the night Peter vanished, a sum tied to Van der Meer's name, a promise of land that was never Peter's to sell. The truth is close, he feels it, but it is still veiled, hidden in the mist. A knock at the door startles him, and Elise enters, her face pale, her hands trembling. She speaks quickly, her voice barely above a whisper, and tells him of a rumour. A man seen leaving the village, heading to Bruges, the day after Peter disappeared. They say it was the stranger, she says, her eyes wide. Klaas was with him, at the edge of the fields. I heard it from Willem. Poirot leans forward, his voice gentle, and asks about the box, about the letters. Elise nods, her breath catching. Peter said they'd ruin someone, she says. He was scared, but he wouldn't run. Poirot thanks her, his handkerchief offered for her tears, and she leaves, her figure fading into the night. The inn is quiet now, the candle's flame steady, and Poirot feels the mystery's weight, its pull stronger than ever. He closes the letters, his fingers brushing the paper, and prepares to confront Klaas, to find Van der Meer, to unravel the truth that binds St. Maria in fear. The village sleeps, its secrets buried deep. But Poirot is awake, his mind a beacon in the fog, ready to bring light to the shadows. The evening settles over St. Maria like a heavy curtain, its shadows softening the village's worn edges into a dreamlike haze. Hercule Poirot stands in the inn's doorway, his coat buttoned against the chill, his eyes tracing the faint glow of gas lamps that flicker in the fog. The air carries the scent of damp earth and faint wood smoke, a bitter tang that clings to the tongue, and the cobbles underfoot are slick, their uneven surfaces a quiet challenge to his polished shoes. The silence is deep, broken only by the soft creak of a shutter swaying in the breeze, a sound that feels like the village whispering its secrets. Can you imagine the weight of such an evening, where every shadow seems to hold a truth just out of reach? The letters from Peter's box weigh heavily in Poirot's coat, their words a map of betrayal that points to Classe and the mysterious Vandermeer. The button, the glass shard, the metal clasp, the scrap of cloth, the key, the hoofprint and the boot mark. Each clue is a thread in a tapestry of greed, and Poirot feels the pattern emerging, its lines sharp but not yet complete. He steps into the square, his cane tapping softly, and heads toward Classe's house, driven by the need to confront the merchant, to unravel the truth before the fog claims another soul. The air is sharp with frost, the ground hard beneath his feet, and the village is quiet, its people huddled in their homes, their lives bound by toil and fear. Classe's house looms at the edge of the village, its windows dark save for a single flicker of light, like an eye watching the night. Poirot knocks, the sound sharp in the stillness, and the door opens slowly, revealing Classe, his face pale, his smile forced. The merchant invites him in, his voice tight, and they sit in the parlour, where the fire burns low, its embers casting a faint glow. The air smells of polished wood and stale tobacco, the furniture solid but cold to the touch, and Poirot notices a new tension in Classe, a flicker of fear behind his polished facade. He sips the offered tea, its warmth a small comfort, but its taste is bitter, a reminder of the village's meagre offerings. Poirot speaks gently, his words precise, asking about Vandermeer, about the letters, about the night Peter vanished. Classe's fingers tighten around his cup, and he denies knowing the man, his voice too quick, too smooth. "You're chasing ghosts, monsieur," he says, his eyes flicking to the window. "This village loves its tales." But Poirot sees the lie in his posture, the way his shoulders stiffen, and he presses, mentioning the ledger, the land sales, the stranger seen in the fields. Classe laughs, a sound that rings hollow, and claims it was business, nothing more. "Farmers sell when they're desperate," he says. "Peter was stubborn, but that's no crime." Poirot tilts his head, his moustache a perfect curve, and produces the key, holding it delicately in the firelight. "For a box, perhaps?" he asks, his voice soft as a breeze. Classe's face changes, his eyes narrowing, and he shakes his head, but his hand trembles, betraying him. "I know nothing of boxes," he says, his voice tight. Poirot nods, tucking the key away, and asks about the boot mark, the hoofprint, the cloth. Classe's smile fades, and he rises, his movements sharp as if to end the conversation. "You're wasting your time," he says, but Poirot sees the fear in his eyes, a crack in the merchant's armour. He thanks Classe, his manner courteous, and steps outside where the fog is thicker now, curling around the house like a shroud. The air smells of wet stone and distant peat, and the silence is heavy, broken only by the soft drip of water from the eaves. Poirot feels the truth drawing closer, its shape almost clear, but he needs more. He needs Vandermeer. He walks toward the village, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, and notices a figure in the shadows, Willem, the farmer, his broad frame hunched against the cold. Willem's voice is low, his eyes avoiding Poirot's, as he speaks of seeing Classe near the old road, the night Peter vanished, with a man in a dark coat. "They argued," he says. "I heard shouting, then silence. I didn't stay." Poirot listens, his expression calm, and asks about the stranger, about the letters. Willem shakes his head, his hands clenched. "I don't know his name," he says, "but he wasn't from here. Too fine, too tall." Poirot thanks him, his voice gentle, and continues toward the inn, the fog swirling around him, the air sharp against his face. The village is a web, its threads tightening, and Poirot feels the mystery's pulse, its rhythm steady beneath the chaos. The hardship here is not just in the meagre meals or worn clothes, but in the silence, the fear that binds every heart. What would it be like to live in such a place, where trust is a shadow, where every secret carries a price? At the inn the fire is low, the room heavy with the scent of burnt wood and stale ale. Jan watches from the bar, his eyes unreadable, and Poirot sits at his table, the letters open before him, their words a map of deceit. He studies them again, noting a letter from Vandermeer, dated the day before Peter's disappearance, promising payment for silence. The implication is clear. Peter found something worth killing for. Poirot closes the letters, his fingers brushing the paper, and thinks of the old road, where the hoofprint and bootmark lie, where the truth waits in the fog. A soft knock interrupts his thoughts, and Margrethe enters, her shawl damp, her face pale with worry. She speaks quickly, her voice low, and tells him of a rumour, a man from Bruges, seen leaving Klaas's house at dawn heading toward the fields. "They say he's coming back," she says, her hands trembling, "tonight, near the old road." Poirot leans forward, his voice soft, and asks about the man, about Klaas's plans. Margrethe shakes her head, her eyes wide. "I don't know," she says, "but the village is afraid. They think the horsemen will come again." Poirot thanks her, his handkerchief offered for her fear, and she leaves, her figure fading into the night. The inn is quiet, the candle's flame steady, and Poirot feels the mystery's weight, its pull stronger than ever. He rises, his coat buttoned against the cold, and prepares to go to the old road, to wait for the stranger, to confront the truth. The village sleeps, its secrets buried deep, but Poirot is awake, his mind a beacon in the fog, ready to bring light to the shadows. The night is heavy, the air thick with anticipation, and Poirot steps into the mist, his cane tapping softly, his heart set on justice. The night in St. Maria is a vast, restless expanse, its fog curling through the village like a tide that muffles sound and blurs the edges of reality. Hercule Poirot moves silently along the path to the old road, his coat a shadow in the mist, his cane gripped firmly, its tip sinking into the soft, yielding earth. The air is heavy with the scent of wet reeds and distant peat fires, a faint metallic tang clinging to the tongue, a lingering echo of the field's scarred past. The willows stand sentinel ahead, their branches drooping like mourners' veils, and the silence is profound, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breeze, a whisper that feels alive with secrets. Can you sense the weight of such a night, where each step feels like a descent into a world of hidden truths? Poirot's mind is a mosaic of clues. The button, the glass shard, the metal clasp, the scrap of cloth, the key, the ledger, the letters, the hoofprint, the boot mark, each a fragment of a puzzle that points to Klaas and the elusive Vandermeer, a conspiracy rooted deep in St. Maria's weary soil. Marguerite's warning lingers in his thoughts, a stranger returning tonight to the old road where Peter met his end. He pauses at the edge of the fields, the ground cold and damp beneath his feet, and listens, his ears straining for hoofbeats, voices, or the faintest hint of movement in the fog. The mist is a living thing, wrapping him in its grey embrace, but Poirot's eyes are keen, his mind a beacon, ready to pierce the veil of fear that cloaks the village. The old road stretches into the darkness, its path a faint scar swallowed by the fog, and Poirot moves forward, his steps measured, his breath steady despite the chill that seeps through his scarf, its wool rough against his skin. The air smells of decay and damp earth, the ground slick with mud that tugs at his shoes, their polish long surrendered to the Flanders lowlands. The distant croak of a frog echoes, a solitary note in the night's hush, and the scent of oil lingers faintly, a thread tying the earth to the clues in his pocket. He reaches the spot where the hoofprint and bootmark lie, kneeling to brush the mud with gloved fingers, its texture cold and gritty. The oil's sharp note stronger here, a silent witness to the night Peter vanished. A low murmur breaks the stillness, voices muffled by the fog, drifting from beyond the willows. Poirot rises, his cane planted firmly, and creeps toward the sound, his movements silent, his presence a shadow among shadows. The voices sharpen, one crisp, city-bred, the other tense, familiar classes. He pauses behind a willow, its bark rough and damp against his hand, the air thick with the scent of moss and wet wood. The city man, likely Vandermeer, speaks in a tone edged with fury, his words slicing through the mist. "Your carelessness threatens everything," he says, his voice cold as the night. "The boy found the letters, and now this detective meddles." Klaus's reply is strained, almost pleading. "I took care of it," he says, his voice cracking. "No one will find him." Poirot's heart quickens, though his face remains a mask of calm, and he edges closer, the fog his ally concealing his approach. The men stand near a ditch, its water glinting darkly, a lantern at their feet casting a weak glow across their faces. Vandermeer is tall, his coat finely woven, his features sharp and unyielding, while Klaus's eyes dart, his hands twitching with nervous energy. The lantern's light flickers, its shadows dancing like spectres, and Poirot listens, cataloguing each word, each pause, each breath of fear. They speak of a plan, a village of land bought at ruinous prices, debts enforced to bend its people, a scheme to control St. Maria's future. "Peter was a threat," Vandermeer says, his voice low, final. "You ensured he wasn't." The words are a veiled confession, their weight a truth Poirot has long suspected. The village's hardship, the meagre meals, the worn clothes, the haunted eyes, is not just a product of war but of greed, a wound inflicted by men who saw profit in suffering. He steps forward, his cane tapping sharply, the sound cutting through the fog like a bell, and the men turn, their eyes wide, their faces pale in the lantern's glow. Klaus gasps, but Vandermeer's gaze hardens, his hand slipping to his pocket. Poirot's voice is soft, steady, a lullaby in the tension. "Messieurs, the night is cold, but the truth is colder still," he says. "Peter's fate is no longer hidden." Klaus stammers, his words tumbling over each other, but Poirot's gaze holds them, his presence a quiet force. He produces the letters, their edges curling in the damp air, and holds them delicately, their weight a testament to his resolve. "These speak of greed," he says, "of betrayal, of a boy who died for what he knew." Vandermeer's laugh is sharp, a blade in the night, but Klaus's face crumples, his breath hitching. "It wasn't meant," Klaus mutters, his voice barely audible. "He fought. He fell. The horse. It was an accident." Poirot's eyes narrow, and he asks about the bootmark, the cloth, the oil, each question a thread pulled tight, unravelling their lies. Vandermeer steps forward, his voice a hiss, his hand drawing a small pistol, its metal glinting coldly. "You have no proof," he says, his eyes locked on Poirot's. The air grows taut, the fog heavier, its chill seeping through Poirot's coat, the scent of fear mingling with the earth. He feels the danger, but his mind is clear, his heart steady, and he speaks again, his voice a gentle tide. "The village knows," he says, "Elise, Margaret, Willem, even Hendrik. They have seen. They will speak." He pauses, his moustache a perfect curve, and adds, "The headless horseman is no ghost, but a man, and his crimes are laid bare." The lantern flickers, its light dimming, and Poirot calls into the fog, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "You're not alone, monsieur," he says, and from the mist steps Hendrik, his massive frame a tower of shadow, his eyes burning with a fury born of loyalty to the village. Klaas flinches, his knees buckling, but Vandermeer raises the pistol, his hand steady. Poirot's voice is unwavering, a beacon in the chaos. "Violence buries no truths," he says, and Hendrik moves closer, his presence a silent threat, his hands clenched, ready to act. The air tastes of frost, the ground hard beneath their feet, and the silence is heavy with the weight of justice looming. Vandermeer hesitates, his eyes darting between Poirot and Hendrik, and slowly lowers the pistol, his face pale, his resolve crumbling. Klaas sinks to the ground, his hands covering his face, his sobs muffled by the fog. Poirot feels the moment's gravity, the truth exposed, but the village's scars remain, its people still bound by toil and loss. What would it be like to face such a reckoning, where justice is won but the wounds of betrayal linger? He turns to Hendrik, his voice gentle, and asks him to summon the village elders, to bring them to the old road where the truth has been laid bare. Hendrik nods, his steps heavy as he fades into the mist, and Poirot stands watch over Klaas and Vandermeer, the lantern's light nearly gone, its fuel spent. The fog swirls, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and fear, and Poirot thinks of Peter, a boy who loved these fields, whose courage uncovered a truth too heavy to bear. The village stirs, its people waking to a dawn that will bring not just justice, but a chance to heal, and Poirot waits, his mind clear, his heart set on order in a world of chaos. The dawn in Saint Maria breaks slowly, its pale light filtering through the fog like a tentative promise, softening the village's weary edges. Hercule Poirot stands on the old road, his coat damp from the night's mist, his cane planted in the earth, its tip sinking into the mud that holds the memory of Peter's last moments. The air is sharp with the scent of wet grass and distant wood smoke, a faint bitterness lingering on the tongue, a reminder of the field's enduring scars. The willows sway gently, their branches whispering in the breeze, and the silence is heavy, broken only by the soft tread of approaching footsteps, the village elders summoned by Hendrik to witness the truth laid bare. Can you feel the hush of such a morning, where justice stirs in the quiet, carrying the weight of a village's pain? Klaas kneels in the mud, his face buried in his hands, his sobs muffled by the fog, while Vandermeer stands rigid, his pistol surrendered to Hendrik's steady grip, his eyes cold but defeated. The lantern lies extinguished, its light spent, and the fog swirls around them, a grey shroud that seems to mourn the boy who loved these fields. Poirot's mind is clear. The clues, the button, the glass shard, the metal clasp, the scrap of cloth, the key, the ledger, the letters, the hoofprint, the boot mark, now a complete tapestry, woven with the threads of greed and betrayal. Peter's death, an accident born of panic and ambition, has been uncovered, but the village's healing is only beginning. The elders arrive, their faces lined with years of toil, their eyes heavy with the weight of judgment. Willem is among them, his broad shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on Klaas, while Margriet lingers at the edge, her shawl pulled tight, her hands trembling with a mix of fear and relief. Poirot speaks, his voice soft but resonant, a beacon in the mist, recounting the story of Peter's discovery, the letters that exposed a scheme to bind St. Maria in debt, the confrontation that ended in tragedy. This village has suffered, he says, his moustache a perfect curve, not just from war but from the greed of men who saw profit in your pain. The elders listen, their silence a testament to the truth's weight, and Willem steps forward, his voice rough but steady. Peter was one of us, he says, his hands clenched. He deserved better. Klaas's sobs grow louder, and he mutters apologies, his words broken, but Vandermeer remains silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if seeking escape in the fog. The elders confer, their voices low, and decide to hold the men until authorities from Bruges can be summoned, a decision that feels both just and heavy, for St. Maria is a place of endurance, not vengeance. Poirot nods, his manner courteous, and turns to Hendrik, thanking him for his courage, his presence a shield in the night's danger. Hendrik's gruff nod is his only reply, but his eyes soften, a flicker of gratitude for the boy's memory honoured. The elders lead Klaas and Vandermeer away, their steps slow, the fog parting around them, and Poirot remains on the old road, the air growing lighter as the dawn strengthens. The scent of damp earth lingers, the ground cold beneath his feet, and he thinks of the village's hardship, the sparse meals, the worn clothes, the haunted eyes, and how justice, though vital, cannot erase the scars of loss. He walks to the village square, the cobbles glistening with dew, their texture a reminder of St. Maria's quiet resilience. Elise is there, her face pale, her eyes red from tears, and beside her stands Anna, Peter's mother, her hands clasped tightly, her grief a silent weight. Poirot approaches, his voice gentle, and tells them of Peter's courage, how his discovery saved the village from a darker fate. He was a light, he says, offering his handkerchief to Elise, and his truth will not be forgotten. Anna's lips tremble, but she nods, her voice a whisper. My boy, she says, he always tried to do right. Elise clutches the handkerchief, her voice soft but firm. We'll honour him, she says, her eyes meeting Poirot's. The fields will be ours again. Poirot nods, his heart heavy with their sorrow but warmed by their resolve, a spark of hope in a village of shadows. The air smells of fresh bread now, faint from a nearby hearth, a simple comfort amidst the hardship, and the sound of children's voices drifting from the streets, a tentative return to life. Poirot returns to the inn, its warmth a faint shield against the chill, the scent of burnt wood and stale ale familiar now. Jeanne, the innkeeper, watches him with a nod of respect, his silence heavier than before, and Poirot sits at his table, his notebook open, its pages filled with the story of St. Maria. He writes of Peter, of the fog that hid the truth, of a village that endured through betrayal. The candlelight flickers, its glow casting soft shadows, and he closes the notebook, his fingers brushing the cover, a quiet farewell to this tale. The village is awake, its people moving through the day with a cautious hope, their hands still calloused, their meals still meagre, but their eyes lighter, freed from the spectre of the headless horseman. Poirot prepares to leave, his suitcase packed, his mind already turning to new mysteries, but his heart lingers here, in the fields of Flanders, where a boy's courage changed a world. What would it be like to leave such a place, where every farewell carries the echo of a life restored? He steps outside, the fog lifting now, revealing the village's stone walls, their weathered surfaces a testament to survival. The air is crisp, the scent of frost fading, and the horizon beckons, a path beyond the willows, beyond the old road. Poirot adjusts his hat, his cane tapping softly, and walks toward the edge of St. Maria, the village's quiet hum a lullaby in his ears, a promise that life, though hard, will go on. And so, dear listener, our tale slips into the hush of night. Are you listening from the misty hills of Edinburgh, the silent shores of Sydney, or a quiet corner in Seoul? Share your thoughts in your city below. Like this tale if it stirred something within. Until next time, keep your lantern burning, your dreams wide open, and may peace walk beside you as you drift into sleep's soft arms.